All right, so here we are, February 23rd, and we've got Mr. Joe Nolan and his baseball cap and his t-shirt on. So I'm assuming you're coaching looks like the dollar signs.
No, this is Chase's team. This is the Splitters. But no, my baseball coaching days are. I'm retired. I am officially a full-time softball coach now.
Oh, okay. You got promoted.
I mean, it's a hell of a lot easier working with the girls than the boys. That's for sure. They listen.
Yeah, I've noted that in my coaching experience too. I'm like, oh, girls.
It is a freaking pleasure.
Yeah. Yeah, they have a larger attention span, I've noticed. Whereas boys are chasing squirrels, the girls will actually focus and listen.
Yeah. I mean, right. Any coaching I would give Chase, I get met with his thoughts.
Yeah.
Any coaching I give Avery, she says thank you and implements.
Yeah, that's great.
So yeah, it's a little different.
All right, Joe. Well, it's good having you on the call. I know you've been a lot of these calls. You're in the field. You're running your solar business. You're interviewing. So feel free to run with whatever thoughts you have. I've got a handful of questions queued up, but I'll let you take the lead.
Yeah. So if we want to get into some Q&A, I'm happy to do that. I did prepare a bunch of notes as well, in case So last weekend I was in Miramar or Destin, Florida. We had our Ox retreat, and this was the first time we did it with families. So we had like 7 families, about 30 people, all in this big giant freaking mansion right on the beach, which was really nice. And you just get themes from those things, right? And I thought I was going to potentially share something with people on this call that I've heard a bunch of times before. I don't know if everybody on this call has heard it. I doubt it. And then I just wanted to talk through it. So I heard a theme come up, and it is not the first time I have heard consultants say this. And I thought, I wonder if everyone shares this with their owners. So I'll just throw this out there. I don't know if you guys know this. Most consultants don't think most owners are very entrepreneurial. I don't know how many times you've heard that, but we've been on calls together where people have made that comment. And I heard that a couple times this weekend. I started thinking, going like, yeah, that's interesting. Like the nature of our business is to run your own show. And then I just started thinking through, like, well, what are the things that we see that would lead us to that conclusion? And let me just take a quick survey here. Good, I can share this because they're not on, which makes sense. But I had a conversation last week with an owner, and I walked away going, why do I even bother reaching out? Like, they're not fit to run a business. And I shut somebody down one time before, just thinking like, they just don't deserve to run a company. And so it kind of got me thinking a little bit of like, there's this idea, right? And then, so my quick thought was, how do you like graduate from sort of the entry-level entrepreneur, and entry level being, our clients are provided, coaches are provided, money's provided, even the people you start with are provided, systems are provided, coaching calls are provided, right? I'm working with a couple of entrepreneurs outside of this business. They value this stuff like crazy. They don't get on haphazardly. And I was like, man, I wonder, if people would like to do something with that. So 3 things that I just wanted to share, and then I'll try to be brief with it so that way we can Q&A anything you guys like. But so the first one, I was like, yeah, you got to be a responder. Like, you got to be a responder. You have to be someone who takes action. So there's a lot of waiting a lot of times. Like, I wonder when my consultant, or promoting owner, or when Sidcore, or when the client will do blank. There's just a lot of waiting for that rather than proactively just taking action. Right? The responder is someone who doesn't always get it right. And that's fine, but they're constantly trying to make something happen. They're constantly trying to get something done. There's an old school meeting, A, B, C, D guys. It's like, they're the C guys, they're our favorite people. We don't care if they're making a mistake. You have to be aggressively attacking. People who kind of wait around, they don't seem to end up doing very big things, right? Like waiting is not a great strategy. Like they're constantly taking action. I also was going through these things thinking like, how would someone who's not a responder be successful? And I think they'd have to probably make sure that they were partnered up with their promoting owner, that their promoting owner was in charge of the vision and probably the operation and the standards. And eventually it just would probably fizzle out. Because that ability to just decide to go and to act seems to be a pretty common thread. And it seems to be something that hey, lots of our owners aren't entrepreneurs. That seems to be a theme, not a responder. Someone who's given really good information and they don't do anything with it. I remember very early in my career, I was at Building Blocks and I asked Gary, like, how do I separate myself from other rookie owners? One of them was weekly planning. So I literally just got back to Austin and bought a Franklin Covey planner. And then the next event we were at, which I don't know which one it was, but Jamie, I think it was you and I, right? We were with him when he was teaching us how he uses his Covey planner. I'm trying to think of who else was there. It was an owner in Cincinnati. I don't remember her name. Anyway. Yeah, that's who it was. So anyway, like it doesn't mean it was done well. It just means it was done, right? So just that one part, like, are you a responder? Like when you get good advice, like you go to an event, Keys is coming up. Do you have something to take action on Monday, or were you just motivated by the words? Right? It's a big, big difference. The second one kind of goes hand in hand, which is with practice, you become an executor. So it is kind of interesting because it's like, I got the kiddos with me. We're in Florida, and it's like, man, everybody here is like successful. They're a stud. I mean, it's really neat. And it's like, yeah, it's just shit gets done. You know what I mean? Like it just you find a way to make things happen. Right. So it's like, if you don't like the culture in your office, you just change it yourself. You just figure it out. Even if you had no instruction whatsoever, you just change it because you don't like what it is right now. Or if it's $1 per rep, sales management. Sales management is a huge piece of this. That's an execution piece, right? So like whatever the obstacle is, you're not waiting around for someone to tell you what it is. And you're not hoping it happens. Because when there's a big boost to like campaign numbers that's like external, that doesn't last. When someone learns how to execute, that lasts. You guys know, does that make sense? You guys know the difference? There's always like, when I first got on retail, I mean, there were 10 people who were supposed to get promoted consultant who I don't know where they are today. But they rode that nice big wave, but it wasn't because they could execute. It was because just everything they currently did just was inflated. And the opposite's true too. So learning how to execute, like just, how do I just get great people into my business? I see Dean turned his camera on. At one point about a year and a half ago, we were just talking about recruiting, and it was like, I'm sure he'd heard stuff before. And all of a sudden he's like, that's it. I'm building a recruiting machine. And he just did. And, you give credit to people or whatever, but the reality is you thank yourself because you know how to go out and execute, right? And you can attracting talent, persuading, navigating change, obstacles, right? It's all just being able to go execute. And then the last one, and I thought this one was really interesting. One of the gripes is always that a lot of owners aren't entrepreneurs. Like they actually don't have their own vision. They actually aren't driving their own car. They're picking up other people's goals. Like you ever have that rep those reps, or they give 3 or 4 reps to talk about one until like, oh, I'm gonna retire my parents. Like, they don't know what that means. They don't know what that will take, but they heard somebody else say it. It sounded good. They didn't have their own goals, so they threw that out there. I actually had a rep one time say to me, you know what? I've been saying that for a long time. I never even thought about it. My parents are wealthy. they don't need me to do that. And I was like, right? Like, you're directionless. Now, listen, that's why the world needs leaders, right? Because so many people don't have any of that. But if you're going to be an entrepreneur, at some point, the goals need to be yours. At some point, it's your vision. It's what you're trying to, accomplish. And what's really interesting is, I think one of the things that dawned on me this weekend is how many different really roads there are with that. There's the consultant path. There's leveraging the money you make to invest elsewhere, right? There's some people on here, I think, who are pretty successful. I think I saw one of them, pretty successful day traders while they run a massive business. There are some people who want to buy other businesses or get into other businesses or real estate. There's a lot of interesting paths with that stuff, but they're driving down their path, right? So they're making sure there's someone who sets their own course. But all of these things are linked together. And I think that's sort of what I was trying to unpack, what are people talking about when they say, most owners aren't entrepreneurial. It's because either they get great coaching and they just sit on it, they don't respond, or they might have all the ideas in the world, but they don't get results, and you have to be able to drive and execute. Or they're missing that last one, which is the goal and the vision is just never really theirs. I remember when my promoting owner left the business, and I got so many phone calls that first week because everyone was worried about me. And I was like, that's weird. Everybody's worried about me. I'm like, I always liked doing the business with him, but I never did it for him. I was doing it for me. So it never mattered. So I'm like, I got my own family to take care of, and I've got my own goals to go after. I got into this to run my own shit. But it is interesting, and I thought it's one of those things where maybe, I just am thinking if I had heard that at some point in my career, I might have been a little pissed. Like, really? Because if I'm not going to be an entrepreneur, don't do this. Go get somebody else to freaking take care of your shit. I mean, they're not going to do a very good job, but, if you're opting out, might as well let somebody else hopefully do a better job with it. But if you are, those 3 things got to get checked: responder, executor, driver. So that was just kind of on my mind as a takeaway. And I figured might be something that's worth sharing. I could dive deeper, but you mentioned there were some questions ready, so I just chopped it up.
I have a question. So if it dawned on you this weekend, what was your original feeling before that perception hit you?
It dawned on me why people were saying that. I always heard people say that, and I'm like, yeah, that might be true. I just never really gave it a lot. It wasn't something that was a particularly interesting topic for me. I also thought part of that is because historically in our business, the goal was not to teach independent thought. It was to teach dependent thought. Here's the one way you do it like this, right? Which has a lot of advantages, especially when things are, early stages and pretty raw. I value participation, and I prefer to be around people who have their own thoughts. So I guess I was probably my ego, Gareth, where I'm like, well, I'm glad that doesn't really apply as much maybe to some of my guys, right? Which is not necessarily true, but that was probably my perception. I just was hearing it a couple of times. I was like, man, I just thought it might be helpful for people to hear that. Like, it's like, it's kind of that little peak. Like I remember, it's like when a coach pulls you aside and they're like, hey, I think you're really good at this, but I don't think you're that good at this. You're like, oh, well, shit, I got to do something about that now. Or you don't, I guess that's an option. But so I was hearing it a couple of times and I'm like, man, I've heard this for years. And it's just like, why are people saying that? And I was just like, yeah, this is sort of the categories of gripes that they fall into.
I feel like you've always been the, well, what are you gonna do about it guy, as opposed to let me fix it.
As to someone else.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, what are you gonna do about it versus,
I mean,
oh, let me
doesn't
try
mean
and put
that's
a bit.
better. So everyone's got a default where their default is either high direction or their default is high support. Now, to be a good coach, you need to do both. But that doesn't mean your bias or your preference ever goes away. People who are high direction would like to be able to jump in and say, go do that. And people who are high support are very hesitant and like, well, give me all your thoughts first. And again, it's just knowing how you're wired, right?
Which way are you wired naturally?
Oh, support. Yeah, sounding board. So that's style 3 coaching, sounding board, that's my default. But I remember learning that whole thing, and I remember talking to Gary, and I said to Gary, I go, because I was talking about the support thing. I'm like, well, that's 100% your style. He said, oh yeah. And I just said, I remember I was wearing a gray shirt, and I say, if I asked you what color the shirt was, you would say, well, what color do you think the shirt is? And he started laughing. He goes, that's probably exactly what I would say. And there's other people, and you can think of a bunch of them off the top of your head. Like if you get on a call and like someone asking a real thought-provoking question, and someone's like, you know what it is, and they just spit it out as if it's fact and there's nothing else to be said, they typically are high direction people. And again, it's just whatever. But I think that if you, again, I'm just kind of coming back to those 3 things, like being introspective. If you can check those 3 boxes, you know, entrepreneur is probably a pretty good path. But it is interesting that there's a lot of people who might be deceiving themselves, like, oh, I run my own business. It's like, well, you know, when does that transition really happen? You know, as long as you're promoting owners, people, or you're in their space, or they coach your guys, or all, you know, you start going on and on and on down the list, you're like, I guess I run my own business. And some people get there right away. But I think it's good to think about how you take the bull by the horns a little bit and go, okay, I take action, I know how to drive and get the results. And then, hey, I'm going in the direction that I have chosen. You never want to be that dog just chasing the car. And then eventually you catch the car and you go, well, shit. All right, next car, I guess. You know what I mean? Like you're just chasing. So you got to choose that obstacle, or excuse me, choose that end game. Choose.
When's that right time? When's the right time to go from having a business to owning one?
I don't know. I mean, I think there's more like, so again, being a responder, that probably needs to happen. Like probably if you're not a responder, you're probably also a shitty employee, right? Like that might just be the first step of just general like behavior, right? But I look at like, if you can't execute, it's going to be hard to get promoted. But there's a lot of executors who get promoted, then they kind of wait for someone to tell them what to go execute next. Or they're just not putting a lot of thought into what they're trying to do. So maybe it's almost in order. I don't know. I'm just thinking of the things that seem to cause challenges for offices, and not really offices, but just for those owners that people with more experience seem to see pretty clearly. Seems to fall into one of those buckets. I don't know.
Hey, Joe.
Yo.
What are you doing? I generally agree with, this whole idea. What are you doing, or what are you gonna do to head this off at the pass in your office? I think we all know that once we promote somebody out, it's too late. What are your thoughts on that?
The responder, okay. Boy, that's a really loaded question for a lot of reasons right now. Specifically with doing some solar stuff and trying to create a different path. I'm very open to the idea that there's a lot of great people who maybe shouldn't be entrepreneurs. And I find, but so maybe you're even helping me with this, that question, Juanice, which is, if there's someone's not a responder, there's not like a lot more for me to do. And I'm not a big fan of, like, I don't mean that as like, hey, go around writing people off. I just mean, if you go give coaching to someone and they don't do anything with it, what are you going to do? Go give them more coaching they don't do anything with? Now, let's say they're getting their coaching somewhere else and they're having success. Well, then maybe they don't want your coaching. That's a different thing. But if they're coming to you for that advice and saying, hey, I'd like help, and then you don't do any, and then they don't do anything with it. So I think that regardless of opening up or not, the non-responder is not a very useful human. That's a hell of a statement, huh? But no, they're not really.
There's a medical term for that, Joe. It's called an asshole.
Yeah.
They ask you for advice and then they don't do it. That's an asshole. So
yeah,
that's the medical term.
Yeah. So I think that, that one might just be a flat out non-negotiable. And then when I just start thinking through, it's like, can someone execute? Can they drive positive change? Do they have influence? Those types of things. Like, I think that's what I'm looking for on the execution side. And, those are tricky, right? Because sometimes you have people who can't execute at one point, but with more practice, they can. So maybe it is actually in order, and then as they start to execute, I think then it's our job to sort of hopefully, I don't know if people are, nature and nurture is obviously, they're two different words for a reason, right? Obviously, there's some predisposition to independence and being independently minded and self-starters and stuff like that. But I also think a lot of it can be coached. But I would want to feel like they can start to formulate their own goals and they can formulate like a picture of what they would like things to look like. But if it's only just like, I get worried about the person who's just down to do whatever I say. Because what happens if I don't say? So yeah, I don't know. I'm unpacking all this stuff right now. This is all top of mind.
So to shift gears a little bit here, Joe, what are your big focuses for the year?
What direction? Where do you want me to go with that?
Well, I mean, kind of a theme we ended 2022 off with was, hey, listen, just simplify your goals. Like, what are your two focuses, right? Even, Gary took the words, strategic initiatives and simplify, like just big focus. What are the two big focuses? And I'm finding a lot of value in owners having really just, I'm focused on A and I'm focused on B, and these are the two things that will then spawn lots of positive change in my business. So I guess I'm posing that question to you, your big focuses that are going to make the biggest dent in 2023.
So the objective is the best people make significantly more money than what they make today. So again, you should ask the question. I'm not doing cartwheels over 800 or 900 bucks a week for a rep. Cost of living's too high. Inflation's crazy. No good. So that's where my attention is, like 100%, because there's some really great people that love what we've got going on, and we need to leverage their game and their talents and innovate. So we've got, the way I look at it is there's a $300 million golden goose, but I don't think suddenly we're going to have 30 ICLs per city. So how do you get beyond maybe 300 million? It's not going to be from doing the same stuff over and over and just replacing clients and cities and owners. That's going to constantly produce that same, maybe 300, maybe 350 is maybe the max. I don't know. So the focus is evolution, right? The focus is addition. So how do you add on to that? There are going to be some owners who are very good, who probably would be better served not running 20 offices or coaching 20 offices, but maybe 2 or 3 that are very high end with some people who have a big fat book of business. So anyway, that's sort of what's on my mind. And so as of right now, with what's available, solar is the best option to do that with. I think there's probably some other ways we could leverage that, but I think I don't get to work for Sidcor. I don't want to. But from my point of view, solar is the best way to generate some serious W-2s. But I'm not married to solar. I really like it. But any vehicle that can help make that happen, I'm willing to dive into.
And what's the size of W-2 that's your goal? Like, have you quantified that?
Every rep has to make 6 figures. Yeah. Yeah. It's already happening, right? So like, around these Vivint guys, all their reps are 6-figure earners. And most of them work 4 or 5 months out of the year. Now, for those 4 or 5 months, they go to a city that they don't live in, shack up with 10, 12 other dudes, and they knock doors from 9 a.m. to 10 p.m. So if you hear the 4 or 5 months, that part sounds sexy, but they're getting a good year's worth of work into those 4 or 5 months. We're stretching that out over 12 months. But yeah, they're all 6-figure earners.
Yeah. And on every campaign, it seems there's, my next call is going to be with Jake Gafford. I mean, his W-2 last year was 92,000. So he's almost at that 2K mark, but on every campaign, we've got these hitters. Last year we were on a call, a rep making $200,000 last year. So it kind of is a different world. I mean, we have these now, it's not on an average rep making 100K yet, obviously, but we're seeing it happening all over the map on all the different campaigns from retail, res, B2B. Any thoughts on that, is there something in the replication process that you think we need to do, or you're just putting all your merit really in creating a new business to add to the existing business?
Well, the other part, right, and this is something that has come up a lot, is when so basically any rep who didn't work a year in the field, see it, don't care. Every rep who worked a year in the field, whether it's our business or another business, is pretty damn good. And it's kind of similar then on the owner level. Like, opening up is not really worth anything. It doesn't mean they go on and run other good businesses or anything like that. But being able to drive to the top of a campaign, sustain that, be high producing, and be able to be profitable for an extended period of time, well, then those people either stay or go, and they're highly successful, right? So there's like these 2 tiers, rep or owner, where it is interesting to see that there's a split, but the split's a high level of success. Part of that on the rep level is people, listen, how long can you go? Like, when I was 25, yeah, I was averaging 65 businesses a day. And I'm like, I can do that to get where I want to go. Now, that's not what people don't have any interest in staying in that. If they're a 6-figure earner in our business and they're not going to become an owner, well, why not make 6 figures somewhere else and do far less? Far less. So I think the other part is that, right? Like, the good part is there's more money in those traditional campaigns on the road to ownership, which is a really big positive for those very, very, very top people. Now the turn to get there is still really, really high. But that's okay because you want to turn those people, right? Those really big, those studs, they're moving on to doing things that are a little just, you got to have a little more brain power, and you're not out there banging 40 to 50 doors or quick questioning 100 people. And so if we don't create that environment, it's not like that environment doesn't exist. It does. They're all doing that. That's where they've been leaving. So I think that, you know, for the young people coming up, nothing really needs to change. You know what I mean? It's still the best entry level entrepreneurship path out there. For people who are going to pivot, why not pivot within our business instead of out of it? And so I think that that's really the key. And so part of it's lifestyle and what you're doing with your time. And then it's also the ability to just earn at a high level. Because it is interesting when you get around some people who maybe were in the business a long time ago and you start talking about sales stuff, they want to know whether it's Cydcor related or not. And the reason they want to know that is they don't want to go work 60 hours for 70 grand. But they should be able to get what they're looking for with us. Now, that comes back to owning your own business for the most part, because that's how you reduce the hands in the jar stuff. We know you've talked about that a million times. But I just think, hey, I mean, you know, 500 million. I mean, based on what we're currently doing, I don't see it. So what are the additions to the core that get there? And I think that it's going to be things like this, or going the other way. Instead of going to the higher end talent, scooping up the lower end talent with like staffing stuff. Whatever it is, it's going to take getting outside of the golden goose and layering other things on to either keep the people we're turning quickly or keep the people that we're turning later that are more talented. Either way, we just have to expand that group. It's kind of just seems like a simple math equation, right? But so my part, I feel like, is the larger. Yeah. I'd rather play with the more talented people. But
yeah, well, good stuff, Joe. I appreciate you sharing your thoughts and giving us your perspective, and adding on multiple entrepreneurial layers. I mean, that's a key word. I think you got people's interest on that, like entrepreneurs. Aren't we all entrepreneurs? I mean, you gave us some good thought-provoking, self-reflection going on here.
Sell something on eBay. You're an entrepreneur.
Yeah, there you go. All right. Well, everybody have a great time in Jacksonville. No call next week. Actually, no call for the next 2 weeks. I'll email everybody that, but enjoy your time in Jacksonville, you guys. I'll talk to you all soon.